Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie, and I'm here with my co-host Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm doing tickety-boo. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic and I'm happy just to dance with you today.
Yes, good. I wish George was happy. He doesn't. He doesn't really sound it, but
No, yeah, yeah.
we'll get to that. Just before we launch into stuff, we will just let people know how they can get a hold of us because we love hearing from our listeners and we want all the feedback you can possibly send us. So if you would care to get in touch, then you can contact us via email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at Beatles_ology. Please like us, rate us, review us, so that other people can find the show and join along with our lovely run through the Beatles back catalogue.
And that's a new feature that we're calling You Can Really Get a Hold of Us.
Yes, not only can you, but it would be really nice if you did.
Is there anybody out there? Sorry, it's kind of vaguely launched into a Duran Duran song now. That was really weird.
Well, we'll try not to hold it
That's
against
from
you.
an album that I haven't listened to since I was about 12.
Yes, you're listening to
Wow.
Beatles Stuffology.
Yeah. Yeah,
Excellent.
today
Well,
we're doing Ordinary World,
yeah.
followed by Hungry Like the Wolf.
I love Hungry Like the Wolf. It's the only
Yeah,
Duran
yeah,
Duran
yeah,
song I
yeah,
genuinely like.
yeah, yeah.
It's a great song. Anyway, that's not the song we're discussing today. We're discussing I'm Happy Just to Dance With You. And we're definitely not trying to pad this episode out in order to find something to say about it.
No, I don't think we need to. I think there's enough to get our teeth stuck into without descending into the kind of arguments that they have below the line on Beatles Bible.
Okay, well, let's find out if that's true. What do you think of this song?
Meh. I think okay, right. I'll expand my meh and upgrade it slightly. It's perfectly fine. It's we sort of get into the kind of discussions here where we say, well, it's an okay song, but it would be a brilliant song for most other bands. It sort of fits within that category of something that they wrote fairly quickly for a purpose. Paul and John didn't want to sing it, so they kind of wrote it with George in mind, and everyone does an okay job. We move on, and coming in a moment, I say in a moment, in the next 2 weeks, will be a song that is superior in every single way, from production, recording, rehearsal, blah blah blah, through to performance. So it's fine. It's fine. It is, as McCartney himself said, a formula song.
Yeah, it's very. I've used this word a few times before in previous episodes. I don't like using it, but I haven't found a suitable synonym for it yet. But it's kind of perfunctory.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a song that George sings on this album, and that's kind of it. I don't know. It's. I what I would like to know your opinion on is: do you think the fact that George doesn't sound very happy on this song, because he really doesn't sound very happy in this song, do you think that's intentional? Do you think it's being done deliberately? Because so much of the song is kind of a bit minor, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
The contrast between that kind of minorness and the slightly doleful delivery, which is normally kind of a Ringo thing, but maybe
Yeah.
do you think it's deliberately? Or do you think he just
So
can't be arsed with it?
I'm going to go early on cover versions at this point. In the last episode, you'll recall that when discussing If I Fell, I mentioned that I'd listened to Julie Covington sing a version of it, and actually she really kind of hit those notes that Lennon found quite difficult to hit consistently and with clarity. Well, I think Harrison sounds a little flat here at times, and yeah, perhaps a little disinterested. But there's a version of this by funny enough, we've gone early on the early 80s references with Duran Duran. Well, I'm going to go with Mary Wilson, she of the Beehive from the early 80s. And she's got a lovely version of this, which is really crystal clear. And the notes that Harrison, doesn't hit terribly well. And I think actually it's maybe an effect of the double tracking. It sounds like it's not quite right both times he sings it, ironically. She just hits beautifully, and as a result, the song sounds different as well. It also helps that perhaps they do that version as a bit of a torch song,
Oh
but
yeah, it's really a torch
it's
song.
yeah, it's a really lovely version, and it's the kind of thing that I like because it does something different with it, as opposed to just doing our version of a song that sounds the same, and we just want to play it because Anyway, and so I think actually what's worth considering is that despite the fact that they gave George plenty of songs in live shows, and there's quite a lot of live shows in the early days where he sang basically as many songs as Paul did, for example. Um, he's just at this stage not a very good singer. Sorry, but I think it's worth saying that as much as there are those people who will defend it to the hill, my emotional response to it at this stage is you just haven't found the song that's suited for your voice, and in fact you probably won't find it for a few more years yet, but that's fine. It's still pretty good, and everything else about it works, so it's not ruined by a poor vocal performance. It's just, well, compare the way this is sung to If I Fell, which is better. I should have known better, which is considerably, sorry, awkward, better. And then and I Love Her, which is a step up again. It's nice that they've got this material for George, and that they feel like it's an inclusive thing. Let's get everyone involved, so on and so forth. But it's not really working.
I think the problem is that there's no real style to this song. I don't mean style as a synonym for class, but it doesn't really seem to exist. And it's not really rock and roll. It's not a ballad.
Yeah,
It's not really. It just can't pick a side. And like you're saying, like when somebody sings it as a torch song, it suddenly becomes
yeah,
something because there's a style being applied to it. You could definitely find other ways of there aren't that many cover versions of this song, which is understandable. I think it's a pretty minor work, and particularly lyrically, it's pretty. well, we'll get to that. But if you pick a style for it, like even the Anne Murray version, which is real cheese.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
really kind of like an awful
yeah.
sax solo in the middle of it and all the rest of it. But at least it's a style. At least it's going for something, even if it sounds almost self parodic at this point. It's picked a team and it's playing it. Whereas the Beatles version, and this is really unusual for them, just doesn't really seem to fit into any one style other than, well, here's the George song, but that's not quite enough to carry over, and that's kind of why I was asking before about whether you thought the kind of like the doleful delivery or the kind of slightly unhappy sounding delivery, which on a song with "happy" in the title, is deliberate or not. Whether they're trying to kind of find
Yeah,
an angle on it, which isn't really there musically, but I have a feeling that might be quite a generous interpretation.
I think that would be one of those things, like we spoke about in the last episode, that is retrospectively applied.
Yes.
And that there are one or two times when there's some witty wordplay that they use that I think Paul is ascribing after the event. It's almost like, oh yeah, we meant to do that, but only they will know for certain. And yeah, anyway, so but there, Paul is interesting talking about this, because in the Barry Miles book, he admits it was written for George. He says we wouldn't have actually wanted to sing it because it was a bit. The ones that pandered to the fans, in truth, were our least favourite songs, but they were good. They were good for the time. The nice thing about it was to actually pull a song off on a slim little premise like that, a simple little idea. It was songwriting practice. And that's the point, isn't it? It was songwriting practice for them. For other acts, it would have been a standout track. You can imagine a band like, I don't know, Herman's Hermits or someone having one of the biggest hits of their career with a song like that. Compared to a lot of the back catalogue, it might have been the best thing that they ever recorded. But for the Beatles, it's the George song on an album, which makes it particularly interesting.
Yeah, I think also as well the the one thing that you can sort of say for it musically is that the chords shift quite quickly. There's not many chords in this song,
Mm.
like seven maybe or eight, but it kind of shuffles around them pretty quick smart, and that's one way of giving the song at least a little bit of drive to it, and it feels like more effort has been made with the music than the lyric. And like I'd like, if that's what McCartney thinks of the song, then okay, fair enough. It's their song. They can think whatever they like about it. But it does have that sense that the lyric is even more disposable. He says, avoiding the word
Yeah,
perfunctory again,
yeah.
than sometimes, and particularly that space face rhyme that's all. It always gets a little chuckle. It's not great, but yeah, because they've put no effort into it. It's just like, well, we've tried this. Does that work? No, we'll do it. We'll get a better one next time round, and that means this song is stuck with the trying it, but it didn't quite come together.
Well,
So
it's kind of a
okay,
rehash of I saw her standing there in some sense, isn't it? It's like, we'll have a dance, and as a result of the dance, the world will be a much better place. So in terms of the lyrics, I don't need to hug or hold you tight. I just want to dance with you all night. Okay, I mean, that's fine. That's fine. Sort of a statement. Doesn't want to kiss or hold your hand, just wants to dance. So it's quite a nice positive statement. It's a bit fun, but it's very, very slight. Um,
I
and
love the way that George delivers the line, "I've discovered I'm in love with you," as if he's seen it on a map and somebody's pointed it out to him. Oh, I've discovered
oh,
it.
in fairness, it's not you, is it? It's you.
Well, that's true.
It's kind of there. Yeah, which is fine. He discovers it at the end as a result of all that dancing,
Which is nice.
which is quite nice, isn't it? But how could he dance with another when he's seen her standing there? That's the thing we need to take into account. But it's not unlike a lot of those other work songs, is it? In that there's not a huge amount of time that's gone into the lyrics. And you know what? It's fine because it doesn't matter. Would the song be any better if suddenly you'd have got some sort of narrative in there, some sort of Dylan-esque narrative about an old hobo who's been wandering the plains for 15 years and is with a stone in his shoe? Or you can tell I haven't listened to a lot of Dylan.
Has it been a while since you've listened to Blood in the Tracks?
Well, I don't know. That could easily be something off John Wesley Harding. I
Oh yeah, that's
love
true.
John Wesley Harding. But you see what I mean. Would
Yeah.
it be a better song? No, it wouldn't. It needs that kind of flippant, shallow, I love you, hey, let's have a dance and let's all have a good time kind of thing. It just it kind of works. And because there are plenty of people out there who take the Beatles' work far, far too seriously. There are plenty of sturdy tomes. Whisper it quietly. There are even some podcasts out there who seek to raise the Beatles to the status of rich academic text.
I can't
And
believe
that's
it.
fine, do it. But for me, it's about an emotional response. And my emotional response to this is I like it. Now it's finished. I'm going to forget about it.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair. And, it's one of the things that these kind of songs suffer from a little bit in terms of our formatting because, it's an album track, and discussing a sort of fairly throwaway album track,
Yeah.
in isolation like this kind of does it a slight disservice because it isn't in isolation. It's designed, if that's quite the right word, to be heard in between If I Fell and I Love Her. And that's where it's meant to be.
Yeah.
So kind of scooping it out, it does provide that tonal shift between those three songs.
Oh, you went for tonal shift. I thought in my head I was predicting JG Bingo that you'd go for balance.
I
A
swerved away,
counterweight
swerved
balance.
away from it at the last second. You should be grateful that I didn't use any French and just leave it
That's true.
at that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Nothing too obsequious this time. Okay.
Okay,
All right, but hang on a minute. I am gonna go in for there is something musically that I really like in this song.
okay.
Okay. And I'm quite deliberate here. It's the backing vocals, not harmonies, the backing vocals. They the
Yeah.
yeah, because they actually add the right emphasis at the right time, and they are beautifully sung. Now, John and Paul might harmonize with each other there, but they're not there to harmonize against George. They're there to add a counterweight, a balance, if you will, to what he's singing. But it also makes it so obvious that they're at this stage at least much better singers than he is.
I mean, there's no way around that, though. That's the thing.
Yeah,
If they're going to appear on singing in one of his songs, then they're going to appear better singers because they just so
yeah.
demonstrably are.
But I think it's worth pointing out because, of course, when talking about 63, 64, and in the main, where you've got those um, co-sung songs where you're just sort of layered with those harmonies. It's one of the things that really stands out for people are the Beatles harmonies. Well, here they're doing something different. It's backing vocals and it's adding an emphasis. And I think that's worth pointing out because I think it's really effective on this. The other thing I was going to ask musically was that, Ian MacDonald talks about there being African drums
Yes.
on this. Well, okay. Um, as opposed to what? European drums?
Well, as
Why?
opposed to
Why?
traditional kit, yes.
No, I know, but and I realise this is not an Ian MacDonald thing, but why are we referring to the drum as belonging to an entire continent? Are there European drums, American drums, South American drums? Could we be a little bit more specific, please? Because actually, that sounds a bit, mm, awkward in terms of the naming there. I don't quite understand why it's oh yes, all of Africa. Yes, we're going for all of Africa here. It's their drum that we brought back from holiday in 47 when we had loads of people there to carry our bags around for us. Jolly good, marvelous. I think, oh right, okay. Does it have a better name? I think.
Um, well, I mean, realistically, it's just a form of bongo, I think.
Okay.
But I think, firstly, hard to imagine kind of colonial and imperialist attitudes existing in 1964. I mean,
I know,
just very difficult to comprehend indeed.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that's what it would have been known as contemporaneously. I don't know enough about the instrument that
No.
Ringo was playing, so I don't want to kind of speculate further. But that kind of drumming, it would have been a hand drum. It would have been something that was slapped rather than something which was played with a stick. So yeah, it would have been more akin to a sort of bongo or something like that.
And in fairness, it's more of a linguistic point I think I'm making. Really, it just strikes me as an odd thing, and you know, if we're still using a term like African drum, it sort of suggests that we haven't really thought that one through very much. But
Well, if we have any drummers in our audience, perhaps they could get in touch and let us know what the sort of story behind that is.
yeah, or we could research it
Well, we
and
could, but we're not going to. So
forget
that's why
about
I'm
it.
asking the audience.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah. Oh, what's quite funny is I mentioned Beatles Bible earlier. I do like having a look on Beatles Bible sometimes. Sometimes I forget when I'm researching this because I do like having a look at the comments below the line because normally you can find pretty quickly some people claiming that one of the most songs in the Beatles canon, in the early Beatles canon, is oh yeah, one of their best early songs. Oh, this one's fantastic. You just think, well, come on. All right, well, fair enough if that's your emotional response, but clearly, objectively, there's a whole bunch of songs that are phenomenal. Am I confusing that? Am I perhaps contradicting myself by talking about emotional response and then objectivity? I don't know. It just seems that people go into bat for some of the most ridiculously thin songs, and actually the comments below the line. Um, now, it's not like there's a hot debate going on because these comments are sort of, you know, the original article would have been posted in say 2010, and the comments have slowly been going on since then. But they mostly seem to argue about who wrote it. Oh, was it John or was it Paul? Oh, well, Paul said this. Oh, yeah, but you can't take that seriously. Oh, yeah, because John had died by 1980. So anything Paul said afterwards can't be contested. Oh, and you know what Paul's like. Oh, yeah, but John used to change his mind. And you just think, why are people litigating this? I mean, I do like these songs, um, and they give me pleasure, but it's not a matter of life and death. And I just find it funny that people can take arguments about this song, that song, quite as seriously as they do. But then that seems to be a bit of a theme in terms of what I'm saying today, because obviously I've implied that about podcasts as well. But that's why I like things like the Big Beatles Sort Out, or Egg Pod, and Nothing Is Real, or the Craig Brown book, for example, because they seem to play up the joy and the fun in a lot of the music rather than sort of pulling things apart and dissecting in that particular way. But yeah, we go. Right, okay. I'm repeating myself, JG. You jump in at this point.
Well, firstly, I think I would say that as far as those kind of comments go and all that kind of stuff, like, part of the pleasure is kind of there's pleasure in being able to bat these things back and forth if it's done in a constructive way. And you can find anybody who can support or love any kind of song, and that's perfectly
Yeah.
valid. And I think of all the bands that's true of, it might be true of the Beatles the most, because they are such a fated act. They're so lauded. It's that thing. I'm sure it's also true in other music services, but on Spotify there's like a deep cuts Beatles playlist, and I think, well, at this point there aren't any deep cuts left. There's nothing.
Yeah.
It's just too well. Not like even What's the New Mary Jane, or My Name, Look Up the Number, or like, they're not deep cuts anymore. They're
Well, Rain,
aren't.
when we first knew each other, Rain would have been that sort of thing
Yeah,
that a lot
exactly.
of people wouldn't have heard.
Exactly, but
Um,
that's a
you know,
long time ago now. It's like touchy. Yeah, yeah. But it's just, availability now is basically 100%. And okay, fine. Every so often we'll get a get back, or we'll get a whatever. But in terms of the actual recorded material, everything is out there. Everything is accessible, and it's just not a thing anymore. Deep cut Beatles songs aren't really a thing. If you wanted to take an example of a deep cut early on, honestly, A Happy Just to Dance with You is probably one of them, because it's kind of a forgotten song, but it's also not, because there aren't any. So now I'm contradicting myself as well. I'm sure there was a point behind all this. I wonder what it was.
no, there is one though that I know that I'm really looking forward to discussing when I think we get to Beatles for Sale, because there was a choice between Mr. Moonlight, which is objectively dire, and something else which I wasn't aware of until we started doing this, and I really really like it. So yeah, it's a real kind of fun, funky cover, but yeah, we'll get to that in about 8 months' time, and we'll discuss that, because we'll need to discuss things like that during that episode, because otherwise it's going to be just a moan fest. So by the way, listener, if anyone out there is a massive fan of Mr. Moonlight and wants to appear on that episode, that could be a good one, because that would then balance out our negativity. And we're going to be negative about that one, and that one only.
Well, I mean, if there's a song that deserves.
Yeah, yeah. I thought you were
Uh,
going to equivocate for a moment there.
I honestly, mostly, I'm looking forward to doing that that episode, because I know what your attitude towards that song is. I can't honestly remember the last time I listened to it. I mean, there are other songs which one could savage, like "Run for Your Life," or whatever. But yeah, they're
Yeah,
better known and sort of more obvious examples.
but the thing about Run for Your Life, without wishing to sort of go too far ahead, and of course you can't do that, is that even though lyrically they are, in the main, objectionable, they're actually really good songs. So
Musically, I
there's
really like "Run for Your Life." That's my dirty little secret. I
there you
really
go.
like it musically. I think it's a great song. It lyrically, well, we'll
So
get to
there's a
that, but
discussion to
yeah.
be had related to that's important, but then also to talk about why perhaps they were writing those lyrics then, and then how they came to change, even to the point of how soon they got to the point where they did sort of then not so much disown, but start to think that, well, maybe that's not quite how we want to come across. But we're sort of then heading deep, deep, deep into the future, aren't we? Um, so, but leave my kitten alone. That's the one. That's the one that they were gonna that could have gone on instead of Mr. Moonlight.
Okay.
Uh, and I really like that. And I'd never even heard of it until a few months ago.
Excellent. Well, this
So
podcast has
hey,
been of value then.
yeah. So let's yeah. And I was talking, listening, and googling at the same time, fans. But there you go. So okay, right. Elephant in the room, because I think we're probably running out of things to say about the actual song itself. Here's something
Probably.
really really positive. And when you're writing the little blurb for this episode, JG, I want you to stress that get through the kind of like the mere element, because actually at the end, what I'm going to basically say is that up to this point, I realize there's not that many, but this is possibly the greatest pop video that had been created up to this point. I realize there's only about 10 to compare it to. But in terms of the musical sequence, I've loved the musical sequences so far on A Hard Day's Night. In particular, I Should Have Known Better, I think is just fantastic. But this is so brilliantly shot. It's really really impressive. From the fact that just before the song starts, you've got that sort of dance troupe with the man in the suit, and then the ladies in the extravagant outfits dancing in front of the set that has three very large Beatles on it, which is hilarious. It kind of reminds me of Dex's Midnight Runners, in front of the pictures of Jockey Wilson. For anyway, there's another early 80s reference. But just sort of thinking, oh, that's just such a fun and bizarre thing to do. But then they come in and they're playing and rehearsing as the dancing girls are going out. And even at one point, someone who presumably is meant to be the leader of the dance group is having to drag the other girls away from watching them, which is really really fantastic. But it's the great way in which you've got them doing something different here. So the initial shot of them playing, it's you've got like a close up, but then it pulls back to reveal that you're watching them through the camera, which is fantastic. It's such a clever little thing to do, based around the fact that they're in a studio. But you've also got a very unusual arrangement going on here, in that you've got the camera is basically over Ringo's shoulder most of the time, and you're looking at John and Paul, looking at Ringo with George just behind them, on the riser. And that. I think it's a really cleverly done thing. I mean, of course, I will be saying in the next episode for And I Love Her that this then becomes the best pop video since, yeah, because it's a better sequence. But I think it's just so beautifully simply done, and it gives us something that I don't think I've seen before, which is McQuarrie playing the bass with one leg up on the riser. I've never sort of seen him do that, because obviously he's standing straight-legged normally, but here he's to see him playing bass with one leg slightly bent higher than the other, you just think, oh, okay, all right, fair enough. Are you giving us a view of anything in particular here, Mr. McCartney? Nicely done, sir. Well done. Would you be happy to dance with us? Okay. So yeah, I mean, kudos to Dickie Lester again for pulling that off, because I think the way in which he presents the Beatles in this film is frankly just stunning. The sequence is just, every time I watch it, I see something else that's new and really beautifully done. I don't know how much he was responsible for putting those together, those musical sequences together, but if it was him or whoever it was, just thinks a genius.
I think one of the problems that always comes up, especially at this part of the Beatles' career, is exactly what you've just highlighted there, which is to say, oh, it's the best example of this, and then next week we have to go on and talk about, well, now this is the best example, and that's just because they're on this kind of straight up trajectory. But it is absolutely true, and one of the great things about the musical sequences throughout A Hard Day's Night is that they do keep kind of topping each other. So it starts off with the sort of running through the station and all that kind of
which is
stuff,
great.
which is fantastic. You know, it's full of
Yeah,
energy and life, and it's just this
yeah.
glorious little sequence. And
And
everyone keeps building that presentation. Yeah, go on.
can I go just say to do a callback, if you like? It very much reminds me of a if Hungry Like the Wolves video hadn't been filmed in Sri Lanka but had been filmed in London instead. That's they're very similar apart from one being in Sri Lanka and one being in a train station in London.
And separated by 20 years. But yeah, other than that, yeah, scarcely different.
No, but the running,
Yeah, no, of
chasing,
course, no, you're quite right.
So,
Um, but everything about the sequence for this song and Hard Day's Night is great. Those Beatles, those three big Beatles, are just glorious. It's so flatly literal. There's no way I will never not enjoy that. It's just lovely. But yeah, it's a really inventively shot sequence, and it keeps pushing the limits of what you can achieve with 1964 technology, like that pullback thing. That's not an instinctive or obvious thing to do, and certainly not in a quickie film like this, which was just meant to be knocked out, made everybody a few quid and forgotten about it. That's a real attention to detail that you just don't get in anything which is sort of vaguely contemporary with this. It's just lovely, and it's this idea that there are so many different ways of presenting what is essentially just a band on stage, but there is so much inventiveness in it. Like you said, the girls who are having to be dragged away, the way that the cameras are being positioned, the way that the shots are being lined up, everything about it suggests a dynamism which just is incredibly atypical for that period of time. And they're investing all that time and energy in this song, and I don't mean that to be quite as derogatory as it sounds, but as we've discussed, it's a pretty slight number all round, and yet the time and the care and the effort that is being put into presenting this song is just as much as it is, noticeably superior next episode songs as well. And that's also really, it's just so pleasing to see that this isn't being treated as a throwaway. And even although it's the George song, it's not being tossed off. There's real effort being put into the way that it can be presented, the way it can be put across to an audience. And most importantly of all, it's just downright charming. It's just lovely, as all these sequences are going to be. There's none of them are anything other than that. But it's so pleasing to see so much effort go in to supporting George's little moment in the spotlight, as well as John and Paul's. And it's just, the end results they're just lovely. They're just so endlessly rewatchable.
And to again to call back, and maybe this will be where we wrap up as well. Originally you asked if George was George actually happy to dance with you? Well, he might not have sounded it on the record, but in the film he sure does look happy.
Yeah, he looks thrilled.
He's having a whale of a time. And that, folks, I think is what we call quite a decent sort of wrapping up. We've called back to earlier things, and we've kind of finished where we started. Unless, of course, you've got more that you want to say.
No, I really don't.
No.
It's the kind of professionalism that I think everybody has come to expect from this podcast. So we can probably wrap things up there. What score do you want to give this one then?
Oh, it's a 6 out of 10. It's a bog standard kind of. It's bog standard Beatles. So if I was doing halves, I would have given it 5.5. But I'm not doing halves. It's not a 5. It's not a. So it kind of fits a 6, really. So once again, it just shows up the ridiculousness of scoring songs like this.
Yeah, but I love a bit of ridiculousness, so I'm quite happy with that. I mean, if it wasn't ridiculous, then it just wouldn't be fun. I'm going to give it a 6 as well. I don't have anything else to add other than what you've already said. So yeah, I think that's fair. It's a workaday song. It's got its place in the album. It's a nice little sequence in the movie. That's fine. Good. That's it. Lovely. Good.
Do your bit, JG.
I will do my bit.
What do we think? So remember, it's the segment. You can really get a hold of us.
Yeah.
Part 2.
You can really get a hold of us at We're not being paid for this nonsense, you know. This comes free.
No.
You can get hold of us at BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at Beatles_ology, and you can find more of my writing at www.jgmcquarrie.scot. Please also check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review us on whatever podcatcher you are using so that more people can find the show. Next week, we will be moving forward with And I Love Her. But until then, keep listening.